This is not her actual name. Peggy did 4 impossible things within the first minute of our meeting. Number 1, she sat in my clinic waiting room reading a romance novel. Number 2, she stood up without assistance. Number 3, she gave me a firm right handshake. And number 4, she said, "Good morning, Dr. Stringer." Now, these 4 things are not unusual for a neurotypical 16-year-old girl, but they should have been impossible for 16-year-old neurodivergent Peggy. Now, what do these words, neurotypical and neurodivergent, actually mean? Neurotypical refers to people who have what we consider to be typical or usual brain development and brain function, while neurodivergent refers to people whose brain development and function diverges, differs from what we call typical. Neurodivergence is a different way of understanding the lives and of affirming the personhood of people who might otherwise only be understood and stigmatized by a diagnostic label, a label like autistic, learning disabled, mentally disabled, or, as in the case of Peggy, brain damaged. Now, before retirement, I made my living by being a diagnostician, and I was good at it. Not unlike Sherlock Holmes, one of my literary heroes, I once accurately diagnosed a medical condition purely on the basis of what a person chose to look at during an elevator ride. I was very good. But Peggy changed the way I looked at my patients because she was very good at doing the impossible. Up to that point in time, my job had been to find deficit so that I could diagnose disease. And I took great pride in being able to do so amazingly well. I was Sherlock Holmes. After Peggy, I was still Sherlock, but I was also more than a diagnostician, more than a deficit hunter. I stopped searching just for what was wrong. It became equally important for me to find what was right and to value them both. To value what was wrong because it sometimes pointed to a disorder I could treat or a person I could rehabilitate. To value what was right because it pointed to a deeper and grander appreciation of a divine dance. It pointed the way to finding what was divine in those who were not neurotypical. And in searching for what was divine in the neurodivergent, I lost any illusion that neurotypical even exists. Why do I call what goes on in the human brain divine? Not surprisingly, Emily Dickinson says it far more eloquently than I, leaving me only to expand on her meaning. Compare the brain and the sky, and it's the smaller of the two within which the other may lie. Our 100 billion neurons, with their 100 trillion interconnections, can store an estimated 1 quadrillion pieces of information. If we were to try to count to a quadrillion at the rate of 1 number per second, it would take us over 31 million years. But in calling divine this brain we share, we must acknowledge how different it is in each of us. As no 2 people are alike, no 2 brains are alike. The divine is doing a different dance in each of us. How does the divine dance in you? Let me tell you how it danced in Peggy. There was nothing but fluid where Peggy's left brain should be. It was the neurological equivalent of empty space. You might think it would have been hard to get more neurodivergent than that until you looked at Peggy's right brain, because there was nothing typical about it either. The usual anatomical landmarks were not there. For one half of her brain to do the work of 2, that half had to be unusual indeed. It had many structures none of us had seen in any brain before. It had extra areas, allowing her to do what should have been impossible. I don't want to romanticize Peggy's life. She had her challenges. For every complex thing she could do, there were simple things she could never accomplish. Her one-half brain had to make choices. It chose to give her language, but not the ability to navigate. She could communicate with anyone, but she could not find her way anywhere. Her brain let her move both hands, but never one at a time. Whatever one hand did, the other uncontrollably copied as if in a mirror. That's how the divine danced in Peggy. How does the divine dance in you? How does it dance in me? Where does it move? Where does it rest? What spaces does it fill? What space does it leave empty? Where does it sing? Where is it silent? And how are we, as a faith community, to respond to such diversity? In our UU faith communities, we're apt to focus on the symbolism of the flaming chalice rather than the two surrounding circles. We variously interpret the off-center flaming chalice as a symbol of religious freedom, a symbol of sacred heresy, a memorial to those who've sacrificed their lives for religious liberty. But what are the less noticed circles surrounding the chalice? Do they respectively represent Unitarianism and Universalism, historically separate but contemporaneously joined in a single faith? Do they originate in the Universalist poet Edwin Markham's verse that I quote now? He drew a circle that shut me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle and took him in. If I may, I would choose something close to what Markham meant. A circle can be a refuge enclosing a place of acceptance and safety, where one's full personhood can flower, however divergent, however diverse. A refuge from those places beyond where rejection, indifference, intolerance sometimes lurk. But intersecting circles also speak of inclusion, of entryways, of unity and diversity, of shared space, of overlapping space where one can be oneself, with others being safe to be themselves as well. Overlapping circles where we are stronger by virtue of our linkage, where we can see the divine in others, even as we recognize it in ourselves. How does the divine dance in me? Well, like with Peggy, it dances with me through words and not through space. I almost never know where I am, but I almost always know what to say. It lets me readily discern the contours of diseases, but not faces. I can diagnose a disease in the brief moments of an elevator ride, but it may take me many hours longer to recognize what name goes with your face. But I've seen you 1,000 times, and no fair testing me later. That is the dance the divine does in me. How does it dance in you? Whatever dance it's doing, it is a dance that is celebrated and safely shared within this circle we have made together.
Poetry is not the perfect analysis of a situation. It is a door that opens and invites you to look inside another room, into another life. In Hannah Emerson's poem we heard earlier, Hannah is never only Hannah. She invites us into her wide expanse of a mind that is always reaching towards a word like kissing and finding it delicious as she reaches towards people, towards language and the affirmation of yes, 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 yes. One has to wonder about the absence found around the presence of those words and the way that absence fills the poem. How much has Hannah spent her life not kissing, not helping? Through the presence of so many yeses filling the poem, filling the page, I wonder how often she has heard the word no. A mind that cannot speak but can write poetry expands our own minds. It makes us wonder if a brain could or should ever be downsized enough to fit the shape of our culture. In both Dr. Stringer's line of work and also in mine, we both encounter so many unique and complex brains reaching towards us across an expanse that humbles us both, leaving us staggering with wonder at times. Brains that are trying to heal. Complex minds that may be covered in a veneer of shame that they are simply too unique or too much for this world. Your beautiful brain. Your confusing brain. Your exceptional brain. Wider than the sky. You may be carrying shame even now that you don't think like others. You may have been described as too much for someone. You may have been described as annoying or needy. You may face the sigh of frustration that someone has to deal with you. You may be walking the long, lonely road of fear, wondering if you can make it through this life. The anxiety and fear surrounding how we perceive ourselves to think differently than others, that is very real. And every generation has their issues they wrestle with as people who are raising children. In the world of education and parenting in 2023, we are expanding into a deeper understanding that kids' brains develop in unique ways, at unique rates, with unique learning needs. So how do you teach a classroom of 30 similar kids? How do you teach, not a classroom of 30 similar kids, but a generation of minds that do not think alike, nor learn alike? More and more children are being diagnosed with attention deficits on autism spectrum, and sometimes I sit back and wonder if we aren't all just trying to fit complex shapes into simple molds. I mean, maybe we should be more concerned with building an educational system that can be flexible and dynamic, a more loving school community, a more open city, a more exquisitely diverse Georgia, a nation concerned with healing. And if we look within, we don't want to live in a world where everyone thinks the same, where everyone's thoughts are on the assembly line ready to do their part for the larger conveyor belt of production. Now, the pandemic put that conveyor belt to a halt for a moment, and the truth is, not all of our kids are ready to get back on the line so quickly. The nature of the beloved community includes the exquisite kaleidoscope of our brains and the ways they express themselves. The very fact that a nonverbal person cannot speak but can write poetry. Reveling in the delicacy of a word like kissing, playing the word yes like a violin on the page. Don't tell me miracles are not happening everywhere we encounter a mind so fantastic. It was my Unitarian Universalist faith that taught me about the beauty and the blessing of neurodiversity when I was learning about the circles that could draw us in. When I learned that the greatest gift a person can give another is simply acceptance. The brain must change radically with the flood of hormones that accompany puberty. Because when I was in middle school, our youth group that got together at the UU church every Sunday was the epitome of awkward. I mean, you can imagine it. It was a group of kids sitting around, staring at the floor, wanting desperately to connect, but not knowing how. The voices in our heads were a cacophony, filling it all up with the noise of shame and self-centered loneliness. Yet something pulled us to appear in that room every single Sunday when we could have been sleeping in. 15 or more of us attended consistently every Sunday in those years, only to greet each other with a nod, no eye contact, and sit awkwardly, hoping and praying for some release from the overwhelming feelings of wrongness that could be shaped into something like belonging. Looking back on those middle school youth group years, I feel complete, shining admiration for those adult volunteers who took us on, who held those circles, navigating the thick fog of awkwardness and grabbing our hands, pulling us through it, though we were yanking ourselves back with all of our might. And I remember one girl who could not tolerate anything that had any kind of an edge to it at all. I mean, religion, sex, conflict, politics, feelings. The moment someone disagreed with someone else in the room, she would just jump up from her seat where she had sat hugging herself, race out of the room, only to hide in a broom closet with tears running down her face. This was about 7th grade. We tried everything we could to keep her in the room. But really, we were in it with her for the long haul. And this is the miracle of religious community. Eventually we stopped trying to change the outcome. We stopped trying to change her, and we stopped trying to change ourselves. We gave up grilling her in the broom closet as she wept, and we just came to terms with the fact that every Sunday she would be with us, and every Sunday she would jump up and run out of the room and hide in a closet for a little while. We did the thing our UU youth ministers were teaching us to do, to honor her worth and dignity, and to practice full acceptance of her, come hell or high water. We kept inviting her to lock-ins, to picnics, to trips to the bowling alley. She always attended. She was one of us. And we were a part of a group that included someone who struggled mightily to be in the group. And yet there she was. And we have people in our own congregation who struggle mightily just to be here. We have people who struggle mightily just to be in the world. And so what you can do, congregation, is to show each other acceptance. Be radically welcoming to new ways of thinking and seeing the world that you could never have imagined with your own brain. It's good for your spirit. Your soul yearns for the idiosyncratic, for the strange, for the expansive. And now for my favorite line of the sermon, this is your brain on love. So let's celebrate each other's ways of thinking. Not everything needs to be fully understood to be accepted. Amen? Not everything needs to be fully understood to be accepted. This is our brain on love. This is the place where you belong. These are the people, look around you, who will stay curious and who will accept you. This is the Spirit affirming your holiness, that however you are, however you come, you are just right.